guided in body and mind by excellent morality and virtue. I revere that assembly of noble beings, perfected in purity, the Sangha, which is the supreme, secure refuge of all beings. As the third object of recollection, I venerate it with bowed head. I am indeed the Sangha's servant. The Sangha is my Lord and guide. The Sangha is sorrow's destroyer, and it bestows blessings on me. To the Sangha I dedicate this body and life, and in devotion I will walk the well-practiced way of the Sangha. For me there is no other refuge. The Sangha is my excellent refuge. By the utterance of this truth, may I grow in the Master's way. By my devotion to the Sangha and the blessing of this practice, by its power may all obstacles be overcome. By body, speech, or mind, for whatever wrong action I have committed towards the Sangha, may my acknowledgement of fault be accepted, that in future they may be restrained regarding the Sangha. So please sit comfortably, just and sit for a period of time. So if you like to just cross your legs or whatever is your usual posture for meditation, make yourselves at ease. And you can close your eyes if you wish. And just offer a few reflections as we sit together. So to remind ourselves that we're sitting here, that is just here and now. And we're not trying to do anything else but just bring awareness to the moment as it is. So just notice the body feels like this. the state of mind is like this. So we're not trying to make anything. We're not trying to create a special state of mind. We're just bringing awareness to the present moment and noticing how it is. At this point in time, we're not trying to define it, to judge it, criticize it, or describe it. Just know it for what it is. Using the body as an anchor to bring back awareness to here and now. It's okay to do some body sweeping if you wish to do that, but just to notice what the body feels like. Some parts are relaxed and comfortable. Some parts may be a bit tight or tense. Can relax, but basically the body feels like this right now. Notice the state of mind. You feel awake or drowsy. You feel at peace or restless and scattered, distracted by thoughts, memories. We're not trying to change that. We just want to establish knowing that the mind is like this right now. If it's at peace, present, centered, that's like this. If we feel distracted, and there's a lot of thinking going on, it's like this. Maybe we have the idea that meditation is about stopping the thinking. That's another thought. The thought that I should stop thinking. So just notice if that's what's happening, just notice it. It's a thought arising in the present moment. We don't need to follow it. We also don't need to get rid of it. It's just a thought. Allowing awareness to settle in the present, in the body, with the body just as it is, with the mind just as it is, not trying to change anything, just notice what it's like right now. Is it relaxed, or we're feeling uptight? It's like this. Inevitably, we have ideas of what meditation is and what meditation should be. We've been told you should do body sweeping, you should do anapanasati, you should make mental note, you should be at peace, you should be concentrated. All of these may be right, maybe not, they're just thoughts arising right now. If we follow them, they're going to influence our attitude towards the present moment, wanting it to be something other than what it is right now. So just to notice these things, these thoughts arising. Learning to trust awareness is about allowing these things to arise in the mind. Meditation is not about stopping the thinking. Meditation is about establishing awareness here and now and knowing. Breathing in is like this. Breathing out is like this. Feeling the body is like this. If it's pleasant, it's like this. If it's unpleasant, it's like this. If it's neutral, it's like this. Noticing memories, thoughts, emotions arising. We don't need to get rid of anything, we don't need to change anything. Just allowing the present moment to be as it is. And taking the awareness as a refuge. The awareness is now, it's here, it's unlimited. The awareness is not contained in the body. Consciousness is not limited to the brain, to the body. It doesn't stop where the skin stops. Consciousness is just consciousness as awareness. The sound of my voice, that's hearing just arising in the present. And when I stop speaking and pause, that's the end of hearing this voice, this sound. So noticing sound. Noticing maybe feeling at peace with it, or maybe it stimulates thinking. And just notice that reaction without following it. Just stay with the hearing. It's just hearing sound arising in the present. And ceasing in the present. Or if it does stimulate thinking, just notice thinking. And it's a kind of energy in the mind. What does it feel like? Give it some space to happen without pursuing it, without following it, but just notice thinking arising. Letting go is also letting things come, allowing things to arise in the present moment, and noticing the arising, noticing the ceasing. So we have consciousness, awareness, it's there. There's silence in the mind, and then a thought arises in the silence. If we don't follow it, if we don't create a storyline from it, just allow it to come, allow it to go, it ceases. And what's left is the silence, the knowing. When we practice watching the breath, we use the breath as the anchor that we keep coming back to. In this case, notice awareness. Come back to that. The feeling in the body, the feeling of the breath arises and ceases. And before it arises, while it's there, and then after the sensation of the breath has passed, there's knowing, there's awareness, consciousness. That's something we can trust. It's always present. It's present before the in-breath begins, after the in-breath has change to the out-breath. When the out-breath ends, there's a pause. Awareness is there the whole time, just watching silently. Maybe thinking arises. I should breathe in long and out long, or I should breathe in short and out short. It's just thinking, and notice that. Notice awareness is there. A thought arises, you know it, and the thought ceases, and you're still aware. The Buddha describes this consciousness, this awareness, as being pure, uncreated, bright, unblemished. And so it's like space. Space doesn't have any characteristic except it can contain objects or it can be devoid of objects. It's still space. The space doesn't change whether it's full or it's empty, like the space in this room. It may be full of furniture, chairs, people, or it can be empty. The space is the same. There's a space in the room, and then there's a space in which the house is, this building. Space is unlimited. It doesn't end with New Delhi, it doesn't end with India, it doesn't end with Asia, Europe. The whole world is in space. The solar system is in space. The galaxy is in space. The whole universe is in space. Nothing limits space. And space is pure, whether it's full of planets and galaxies or stars, or whether there's nothing there. Consciousness is like that. Consciousness is wide open. It's not personal. It's not my consciousness and your consciousness, it's just consciousness. It knows. It knows the present moment as like this. Sensations in the body arise and cease in the present like this. They arise and cease in consciousness. Feelings arise and cease in consciousness, but they don't affect consciousness. Consciousness is not changed by the passage of a pleasant or unpleasant feeling. Memories, emotions, thinking, all of these things arise and cease in consciousness, and we're conscious before, during, and after. Try intentionally thinking, I am sitting. And notice before you start thinking, before the thought arises, you're you're conscious, and then I arises as a thought in the mind. I. Silence, but there's consciousness there. And then am. And then sitting. So intentionally just bring up this simple thought, I am sitting, and notice consciousness is there before. The thoughts arise and cease, and there's still consciousness there, before, during, and after. So noticing awareness allows us to inform the heart with wisdom instead of experiencing the world through ignorance. The wisdom of the Four Noble Truths. There is suffering. There is discontent. How does that arise in the present moment? When we sit down to meditate and the mind is thinking a lot, if we don't want it to think, we don't want the thinking, then that's grasping the thinking and trying to get rid of it, wanting things to be different than they are. That's when we react out of ignorance, grasping hold of it. Or maybe they're entertaining thoughts, beautiful thoughts, enjoyable thoughts, and we indulge in them. We follow the storyline and we can be gone for a minute, 10 minutes, a whole hour. That's also grasping. If we trust the awareness, the sati, the sampajanya, the wisdom, is knowing, thinking, thought arising in the present moment, not getting drawn into the content of the thought, but just knowing it for something that's created and dissolves, and staying with the knowing. That's peaceful. And then whatever the thought is, a pleasant thought of something we would like, and we pine for and desire, and then when it ceases, we feel a bit sad, or we don't get what we want. That's suffering. Or we try to get rid of what we don't want, and we just create tension in the mind. Trying to get rid of thinking, trying to get rid of anger, trying to get rid of defilements, of the hindrances, of jealousy, anxiety, worry, delusion, get rid of ignorance. Whatever arises in the present moment just arises, give it space to arise, and just know it. Oh, I don't have to follow this, I don't have to get rid of it. Just let it be. Or if we do grab hold of it, just notice that and notice what the reaction is, what it feels like. And we can see what we're doing, the reactions that usually come up that are based in ignorance, rooted in desire, to have, to be, to get rid of, to suppress. And we can come back to this awareness of here and now. We can see what we're doing when these things arise in the mind, how we create suffering, how we engage in conflict with the present moment as it is because it's not the way we want it to be. That is recognizing suffering. So when the Buddha points out that there is suffering, it needs to be understood. He's encouraging us to allow suffering to arise in the mind, to arise in consciousness. Allow it to be the experience of the moment. And we can see it for what it is. The natural reaction is to let go of it. Rinpoche traveled to the United States, and there was a layman who was his attendant, who had been a monk with him for a couple of years. I went to greet him at the airport and traveled with him, helped translate from Thai to English. I looked after Rinpoche during the trip, and one day they were relaxing in Rinpoche's room, just chatting, and this layman tried to put an electric appliance connected to the electrical socket and got an electrical shock, and he immediately dropped what he was holding, and Rinpoche just looked at him and chuckled and said, you let go of that pretty quickly. How come you can't let go of suffering? It's because you recognize the pain of something. So allowing the present moment to be what it is, if it's pleasant, if it's peaceful, if it's bright, just to know it's like this right now. It'll change, and just enjoy it while it's there, and know that these things change. If we don't grab hold of it, we're not setting ourselves up for suffering. And if things are not going our way, we're feeling drowsy, we've got a sore back, a sore knee, keep getting distracted, can't keep the attention here and now. Just notice this is what it's like right now. When we take time to just sit with awareness, with consciousness, letting that be the field in which our experience arises, not trying to distract ourselves, not trying to keep busy, but just sit and watch what the present moment presents us. Take time to do that, then things start coming up in the mind. Emotions that we might have repressed in the past, patterns of reaction that we habitually follow when certain stimulation arises. So we give these things space to arise, to manifest in the present. We don't follow them, but we also don't try to suppress them, just allow them to arise. I was telling earlier today, when I ordained at 30 years old, I had this memory of having been in the monastery 10 years before, having had pleasant experiences, good meditations, and I somehow had the notion that I'd wasted 10 years of my life, and I wanted to make up for that lost time. So this is just an idea that I created in my mind, an ideal. And then I started doing a lot of sitting, spending a lot of time on my own, and I realized that living for 30 years in an unreflective way, meditating just now and then when I was in the mood for it, and just creating a lot of kamma, following emotions, indulging the things we like, running away, trying to get away from the things we don't like, and creates habit patterns in the mind. So when we sit meditation and we just allow things to be as they are, you realize there are all kinds of stimulations arising. Some are pleasant, some are unpleasant. We usually go after pleasurable sensations and try to get rid of unpleasant sensations. So here we're just sitting with these things. A sensation arises. If it's unpleasant, it's just like this. Not following the reactions means not trying to get rid of it right away. Just sit with it. If the habit in the mind is quite strong to get rid of unpleasant sensations, then we're going to find it difficult to just sit and allow it to be what it is. That's the habit of grasping, of trying to make it different than it is. Grasping hold of a desire to annihilate it, to destroy it, to suppress it. Not wanting to have this experience. So we can trust the knowing, just know the sensation, know the feeling, it's pleasant, it's unpleasant, knowing the reaction, wanting to hold on to it, wanting to get rid of it, allowing all of this to arise in the present moment, and just watch it, open up to it. Give it some space. And just staying here, now, and being patient with these things, being patient with difficult emotions, being patient with drowsiness, being patient with restlessness, being patient with desire, with anger, being patient with thinking, and if we're patient enough, we notice these things cease. And when they cease, the desire to hold on to them, the desire to get rid of them ceases, and we're left with peace. It's a way to relate to our experience where we're not creating suffering in relationship to things. We're just allowing what arises to cease. We're developing space and depth in the mind. We stay with awareness and becomes our refuge. It grows. Noticing the body, sensations of the body in awareness. And they notice awareness is not the body. The experience of the body arises and ceases in awareness. The body is created, it's born, it's conditioned. It's a sankhara, arising and ceasing. And then there's consciousness, awareness, in which we experience the body. Where we experience the arising and ceasing of feelings, of memories, of thoughts, of emotions, of the senses. So this is what the Buddha is pointing to as the way out of suffering, coming back to awareness, allowing sankharas to just do what they do. They arise and they cease according to causes and conditions. Sumedo is always talking about the unborn, the uncreated, the unformed, the unconditioned, as a teaching of the Buddha that he used a lot to reflect. And this is something we can observe when we come and establish mindfulness here and now, stay with awareness, and notice this consciousness as that in which experience arises and ceases. Everything that arises and ceases in consciousness is the born, the created, the formed, the conditioned. And as we learn to notice those things and just let them be, let them arise and cease, we're letting go of the karma we create with these things, and we can notice the space between the arising and the ceasing, the arising and ceasing of phenomena, the peace. That we're constantly grabbing hold of sankharas as they arise. We're attaching ourselves, we're binding ourselves to that which will die, which will pass. We identify with it, then when these things die, we die with them. That sense of identification has to experience death. When they're born, we experience birth. We identify with it, and then when they cease, we experience death. If our refuge is the awareness, that's where we find the freedom from birth and death. Because we're not binding ourselves to that which is born, which is created, which is formed and conditioned. So I'll leave this for now. If there are any questions, you're welcome to ask.
Ajahn, you spoke about anatta and how to experience anatta. Could you help us also understand how can we sustain this understanding in day-to-day life, especially, when we tend to lose that awareness time and again? Thank you.
It's good to remember that anatta is Dhamma. Anatta is just the natural way of things. We don't need to create a sense of anatta because that's the natural state of things. In Thai they have a word to describe, say something's natural, they call it Dhammachat. It comes from the word Dhamma, so it's the way of nature. So it's good to remember that, and we don't need to create the perception of anatta as much as remind ourselves of it. And it's useful to notice when we're creating a sense of self. That's where we tend to get caught up in our experiences, creating sankharas. When we're children and we identify as children, and when we argue with our parents. With parents, we are a father or a mother, a son or a daughter, or a grandmother, or whatever the positions are that we identify with at home, at work, whatever the moods are that we experience throughout the day, and there are usually a lot of those. Every time we identify with one of these things, when it arises and we automatically, out of ignorance, out of lack of mindfulness, we identify with it, that moment we're creating a self. And so, re-establishing mindfulness, coming back to this intuitive awareness, to this sense of knowing in the silence of the mind, what is arising is something that's just arisen. noticing when we're creating a sense of self, then that automatically opens up the perception of not self. So say, for example, someone says something we don't like, and we feel angry, we feel annoyed, resentful, whatever. It's very easy to get caught up into the storyline. They shouldn't have said that, it's not right, it's not fair. So just to notice that that's what we're doing. That's the part of knowing, understanding suffering, is really just opening up to it, noticing that when we're angry or we grab hold of it and we start feeling self-righteous, wanting to defend ourselves, wanting to accuse the other one of being wrong, that's when we create a sense of self, and that's when we sort of engage in battle with the world. And to notice that. So it's a very good pointer that the Buddha gave us, speaking about the First Noble Truth, saying there is suffering. So to recognize in this experience, is this enjoyable? Am I actually enjoying this? And if we look at it in those terms, it says no. Being angry is not fun. Being angry is not enjoyable. Being self-righteous is hard work, because it means I have to go and argue with everybody and convince them that I'm right and they're wrong. And there are not many people who are going to let us get away with that. So it's creating a lot of work, a heavy burden for ourselves, sort of creating this sense of self and then having to defend it and prop it up in the face of the world of experience. So recognizing suffering, the moment we recognize it, we recognize that anger has arisen, and we grasped it, we grabbed hold of it, we either followed it and replied, or we keep it inside but we're feeling very upset about things, or we're feeling upset with ourselves because here I go, I'm angry again, I shouldn't be getting angry all the time. That's following the anger or trying to get rid of it, to suppress it. But then there's this alternative, this option that opens up when we just say, oh, this is anger. It's got its causes and conditions. If someone kicks me in the shin, it hurts and I'll probably get upset with the person who kicked me. But then I can just notice that, the causes for anger to arise have come together. Someone came and kicked me in the knee or something, and I feel upset. So that's where I like to rephrase something. When we're operating from thinking, it's good to use the thinking to kind of diffuse this process of identification and go, oh, instead of thinking, I'm angry, this hurts, he shouldn't have done that, is to go, oh, this hurts, this is the experience of pain, and this is anger, this is irritation. This is what it feels like when we feel like we're treated unfairly, unjustly. Just sort of rephrasing it in the mind without the personal pronoun, because then we don't make a personality out of it. We don't make I'm someone people shouldn't kick, or I'm someone who's right to be angry if people kick me, or whatever it is. So to notice when we're creating this sense of self, we create a sense of self around responsibilities. We can take our duties personally, at home, as a mother, as a father, as an uncle, whatever the position is. Raising children, we feel responsible for them. Did I do things right? Is it my fault they are the way they are? Where did I mess up? Or they're not turning out the way I want them to be? Or our parents are not relating to us the way we want them, they're not recognizing us for our value, they're misunderstanding us, or they're wonderful and they're my parents and then they're best in the world. There's nobody else like them. That makes our family special. And it's not so much about the content of these thoughts and how we feel about things. It can be right or wrong. It's irrelevant. It's more about noticing how we relate to the experience and how we tend to create a sense of me out of that. So when we notice the creation of I, then it stops being a process that happens in ignorance and becomes something that we notice in the present as a sankhara. So say we get upset about something, the situation is not turning out the way we want it to be, and we get upset with it, we get upset with ourselves, with whatever, with the whole world. And just noticing, we feel upset, and we grab hold of it, and we want things to be differently, and then we created this whole sense of me not being happy with things the way they are, wanting them to be different. So that's when you open up the door to notice not self, noticing the creation of a sense of self, and then coming back to awareness, that knowing what creating a sense of self is like, puts us back in this position of knowing, and knowing is not self. Knowing is just knowing what arises, knowing the experience of the moment. And then it becomes an object of knowing rather than something we identify with. And that's relating to things in terms of not self. That's when I am angry becomes this is anger arising and ceasing. And usually a very trustworthy characteristic of whether we have let go of it is whether we're still suffering or not. When we relate to the experience in terms of just experience arising and ceasing, we don't tend to create suffering around it. If we're suffering, then it's time to come back and have a look, okay, what is it I don't want? What is there that is present that I don't want? What is there that is not present that I would like? Where am I creating suffering? Where is desire operating? And just stop and look a bit, and then usually you can pretty quickly identify what the obsession is, where it is that the grasping has taken place. And you can release that. And then suffering ceases. It's like with impatience. I once, a couple of years back, I asked Lumpo Sumedho, I'm a very impatient person by nature. How do I get rid of impatience? And it almost sounded funny when I was asking, because I realized what I was saying, and it's sort of textbook classic, don't do that. But that's the way I felt. I was literally just giving words to the way I felt. The emotions are not rational. Like on a rational level, we can know all the right things and everything, but on an emotional level, that's what's happening. How can I get rid of it, or how can I make this last forever? And what he told me, he didn't answer how to get rid of impatience or how to develop patience. I'm not a patient person, how do I develop patience? He just said, notice impatience, and he didn't say anything else. And just the way he put it, he wasn't confirming that I was an impatient person, he wasn't confirming that I needed to develop more patience, and he didn't use any personal pronouns. He wasn't confirming or denying anything. He was just pointing out at knowing impatience. And that was very helpful, because then I started paying attention to that, and it brought to light the fact that I was trying to get rid of impatience and trying to develop patience. And what's the picture behind that is that I am someone who lacks patience, who needs to develop patience. So there, I've created a personality out of that. Or I'm someone who's got a lot of impatience and I need to get rid of it. And then again, creating a sense of self there. Whereas, just know impatience, notice it. So it arises, usually when we don't get what we want. And then if we notice it, we don't have to follow it. It arises and ceases, and what's left when impatience ceases? Patience. You don't need to create it, it's just there. So if you want to sort of develop this sense of anatta, it's good to just pay attention to where we're creating the sense of self. Letting go of that, what you're left with is anatta.
So, keeping this awareness of anatta or emotions or sensation, whatever, or your thoughts all the time, this seems a lot of hard work. It seems as if you have to, because the tendency of mind is to go here and there and keep on struggling with the stories. So it seems like as if you have to do a lot of hard work constantly.
Well, awakening doesn't come for free. If it was a handout, I think we'd have all gone for it already. But the Buddha spoke about right effort. Yeah, in the Noble Eightfold Path, there are these 4 kinds of right effort. And so initially, when I think of effort, I think of what you just said, hard work, and sort of toil and sweat and blood, and a lot of exhaustion. And sometimes we approach meditation, we approach practice in that way. It's like, okay, now I've got to do something. Right effort needs to be informed by right understanding, by right view. And if it is, you realize right effort is not all of that much work, actually. And most of what right effort consists of is investigating, looking at our experience in the present. Is there suffering? Like, it's good. I find it very useful to ask myself questions. Like, sometimes I can just sit and sort of have this vague, unverbalized notion of having to do something. So I ask myself, what do you want to do? And then immediately it sort of makes conscious this wish to do something. And the important thing to remember is that awareness is always here. When the Buddha speaks about this, the unconditioned, when Lompa talks about this very often, the unformed, the uncreated, the unborn, the unconditioned, what they're referring to is this consciousness that's always present, that's not created, the knowing. Now, usually we forget that and we operate from ignorance, we operate from desire to get what we want, to get what we don't want. And actually that's where we're generating a lot of hard work and get really exhausted. I mean, people burn out trying to keep everything in their lives under control, trying to make sure they do the right thing at work so that they're appreciated at work, or so they don't get fired and they get enough money to bring back for the family. And then coming back home and wanting to be absolutely the perfect mother or the perfect father with the kids, trying to do nothing wrong so the kids become really good people and grow up to be educated and mature and happy, and trying to keep the household clean and not let clutter accumulate in this corner and that corner of the house, and when things break down to fix them right away, and when things don't go right to set them right, and to be careful that nothing goes. That's a lot of work, always trying to keep everything under control. And this is usually what we do when we're operating out of ignorance. We're not sort of just stopping to look at what's there and to recognize what is worth investing energy to and what's not, weighing what is going to have beneficial results and what's actually going to have unbeneficial results. You probably heard of this expression, like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So we can mean to do well, but we're creating a whole bunch of problems because we're trying to control and have things the way we want them, because we think that's the way to happiness and to security. Trying to keep healthy, trying to keep wealth, trying to hold on to happiness. Whereas the reality of all sankhara is that they're impermanent. So when we come back to this awareness, just when Lompa keeps reminding us to trust the awareness, we don't need to create awareness and then trust it. Awareness is already there. It's like the space in the room, it's here. It's just we don't notice it most of the time. So now we can notice all the people in the room, but how often do we pay attention to the space between the people, the space between the people and the ceiling? We don't really pay attention to these things. We pay attention to the things that we notice in space, but we don't pay attention to space. It's the same with re-establishing awareness. So awareness is there, consciousness is there. It's always here and now. So just bringing attention back to here and now, that's not very difficult, but it does mean you have to stop. So it does mean we need to direct the mind, but it's really more establishing the right view, the right point of establishing ourselves at the right point from where we will view experience in terms of Dhamma rather than in terms of self. And so when we learn to do this, you realize we're putting ourselves in a position of tranquility. The effort we need to make is to let go of the things we're holding on to. But you can't make yourself let go. Let go is something that happens naturally, like I was saying earlier. If you grab hold of something very hot and it burns your hand, you don't have to tell yourself let go. You automatically drop it. But it implies that you're sort of noticing the suffering. The suffering registers and the reaction is to let go. Sometimes in the monastery people come to stay some time and they want to ordain and they stay for a little bit, and some people leave, and I've heard sometimes when we discuss amongst monks who've been around for some time, he said, oh, he hasn't suffered enough yet. It's a bit of an unfair thing to say because we all do suffer. But what we mean by that is we don't recognize the suffering. And I've seen some pretty neurotic characters come to the monastery and they're looking for happiness as well, but they're just so totally caught up in their own world and perception of the world that they haven't stepped back to realize that, yeah, I'm creating all of this. So recognizing suffering, this First Noble Truth, really is the key to opening up the path. I mean, it really is the first step on the path, is just recognizing and acknowledging the suffering. Once you do that, letting go is not difficult, it kind of happens naturally. So in the classic formulation of the 4 types of right effort, the Buddha starts off with saying, we generate desire, we endeavor, we persevere, and then we cultivate this perseverance until culmination. It starts with generating desire. So when you think of it, through thought we can create a very, very complicated idea of what practice is all about. And just thinking of practice can be exhausting. No, that's not for me. But if you come back to something very simple, just notice suffering when it arises, and just look at it and try to understand how am I relating to my present experience that's creating suffering? Just a simple question like that. And Ajahn Dhammārāma was the one who kind of coined this expression. What is there that I don't want? What isn't there that I do want? A little question as simple as that, it kind of very quickly points towards what it is in our experience that we're fighting with. Something nice that's ceasing, or something nice that we want and we're not getting, or something unpleasant has arisen and we're trying to resist it. And we realize the suffering really arises in that struggle, trying to get what I don't have, trying to get rid of what there is, what I do have. The moment we see that, then the letting go, you kind of, I'm actually creating a lot of difficulties for myself just by trying to get rid of this. I can't just accept it, it'll pass. We're coming back to here and now, to a position of just accepting the present moment as it is. So the effort really is about, the effort involved is coming back to that point of view from which you have a perspective on the present, where we're not creating suffering. Is that helpful?
Ajahn, there are some questions from our friends who are participating in the program online. So if you have permission, I can ask those questions. There's a question from a friend, Dr. Madhusudan from Maharashtra. He says, does the Akasha Dhatu, the space element, have the characteristic of anicca, dukkha and anatta?
Well, space is something we relate to through mostly our visual ability. So as it's based on the eye and we see space, then yes, it is dependent on things that are conditioned and is impermanent. But then consciousness, that's what, like this, using space as an object of contemplation is very useful, because there are excellent parallels that we can draw in the experience, that in how we relate to space and the objects in space, that allow us to understand consciousness and sankharas that arise in consciousness. So that's where developing awareness of space and noticing space, noticing the qualities of space, that it's only limited if we hold on to the limits, like in this room, the 4 rooms, the floor and the ceiling. And we can think of the space limited by that. But actually space, these walls are in space, the ceiling and the floor are in space. So space has this kind of notion of not being characterized by the things that fill it or the things that are not there. And it's a very useful perception to use, sort of to get familiarized with that, because we can relate to it visually. We can actually, it's easier to, as an exercise, just sit here and watch the people in the room and then notice the space between the people. So especially if we're with a group of people that we know, I like this person, I don't like that person, this one praises me, that one criticizes me, and then all of these things kind of give rise to a lot of feelings and emotions and thoughts in the mind, and create a lot of activity, and we can create a lot of suffering around that. I like to be with this person, I don't like to be with that one, trying to control our environment. So that's what happens when we pay attention to the people who are in a house, in a room, at the office. We can stay in exactly the same position, and instead of paying attention to the people that we like or we don't like, I like the way this person is dressed, not that one, and following our likes and dislikes and getting caught up in the whole commentary that comes with that, if we notice the space between the people are still there, but all of a sudden the mind is not so agitated. We can still notice this person is dressed like this person is dressed like that, but in between those two people there's this space. And space is neutral. It doesn't excite the mind. We don't like or dislike space. It's a perception. We're looking at the same picture, but we're paying attention to an aspect of it which opens up the mind and makes it peaceful. And so using space visually and sort of playing with that and watching how the way we pay attention to things influences the state of the mind and allows us to come back here with some stillness and some peace, and allow people to be the way they are, to behave the way they are, whether we like it or not. It's not so important anymore. We don't have to struggle with it. We don't have to get rid of those we don't like and hold on to those we like. It's a very good way of informing the mind of something that's very similar to this experience of consciousness, which is more difficult to describe. But consciousness has the same characteristics.
There's another question from Mahima. I think question of all of us probably. About practice, how do we know what we are doing is sufficient? How to know if I am practicing in right way, right amount, right quantity? How to gauge my practice and how to keep on improving it?
The Buddha, he gave a very easy measuring stick for that one. If wholesome states are increasing and unwholesome states are decreasing, then we're on the right path. Another way of looking at it is just, am I suffering more or less?
My question is, what steps should we take to develop samadhi?
Find a teacher and listen to him, visit him often, listen to the teachings, pay attention, remember what he said, and so there's a sequence the Buddha gave. It's exactly along those lines. Usually we have faith arises because we see someone who seems happy and free. So we go and ask them, what's the secret? And then they start sharing with us. And so when we find a teacher and he starts pointing the way and explaining and pointing out to us what it is in our way of relating to the world that causes suffering and how we relate to the world in a way that stops creating suffering. And then we listen to that, and by hearing it often, we remember, because sometimes we're not always able to hold on to everything that's said, but going frequently, we become familiar with the teaching. And then you don't necessarily have to go and see the teacher, you can be in a situation and remember what you learned. And so basically we need to hear the instructions, hear the guidance and the encouragement until we've integrated it. And then when you remember it, then to use it. It's intellectual knowledge, it's thinking. How do I use that to guide my relationship to my daily experience, to my daily life? So read the suttas and then go and visit teachers often, go and listen to monks and people who practice, who have experience. Visit them often and listen to them, ask questions. And then to remember that and to compare these instructions to what we're actually doing. And so how do I integrate this into the heart, into how does intellectual knowledge become insight? So just bringing it back into our daily life. Things as simple as the morning chanting, which we haven't had an opportunity. There's this little section that describes the teaching of the Buddha, describing suffering. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. Being associated with what we dislike is suffering. Being separated from what we like is suffering. Not getting what one wishes is suffering. In brief, attachment or identification with the 5 khandhas are suffering. If you chant this regularly every morning, it comes back to you during the day. Like when you go and listen to a teacher or read a sutta and read Dhamma and listen to Dhamma regularly. They're very widely available on the internet. So to listen to it regularly, then it comes up in your mind during the day. We start feeling upset about something, and then all of a sudden this line pops up, not getting what one wishes is suffering. And you just see what you're doing. Say, I'm just fighting with this because I'm not getting my way. Let it be. And so this is a way of using what we've read, what we've heard, what we've been told, what we chant, the words of the Buddha, using them and slowly, little by little, bringing them into the heart when there is suffering that arises. Remember some Dhamma or read some Dhamma, listen to something, to re-educate the heart with Dhamma, so that consciousness is not informed by ignorance and results in suffering, but it's informed by Dhamma, by truth. And the result of that is freedom from suffering.
Is the romantic love the biggest impediment, and is it the biggest impediment to the enlightenment?
You want to say it again?
Yes.
So everybody can hear?
Yeah. Is the romantic love the biggest delusion?
It's not the biggest one. The biggest one is belief in self. But romantic love can be very confusing because there is such a thing as love. In Buddhist terms, we speak about metta, loving kindness. And metta is really about allowing people, allowing things, allowing oneself, allowing conditions to be what they are. Having the kindness to allow things to be what they are, to allow people to be what they are. And the classic way of cultivating that is to sort of wish ourselves well, wish others well. Now, if you look at things in terms of Dhamma, in terms of anatta, because there is no me, there is no you, there is no oneself and others, then the function of metta, when it arises in the heart, is kind of a natural pure emotion that arises in the mind. We call the four Brahma Viharas. They're the natural emotions that arise in the mind when we're not creating a sense of self. It's just the present moment is like this. It is what it is. It arises and it ceases. And we're not creating suffering. We're not creating anything out of that. With romantic love, what we tend to do is we're operating from a sense of me, liking that person. And because that person makes me feel good, I want to hold on to that person, sort of tie the knot, as we say. And then we feel possessive of that person because that person makes me feel good and I want that to last forever. Whereas I don't always feel good with everybody else, but that person's special. And we're creating this relationship, we're creating this special relationship in our mind by establishing a sense of me, identifying with the good feelings that we experience in presence of someone. It doesn't mean the good feelings aren't there. They are there. We do experience these things. But the natural reaction is sort of to say, well, I want happiness, I want this to last forever, so I'm going to stay close to this person and get married and spend my life with them. Which is okay in worldly terms, and that's what the world is made of. Otherwise we wouldn't be here if that didn't happen. But also notice what happens when we do that. We're creating a separation. There's me and the other person, and then the others. I love this person specially, and the others are not so special. And so we're creating a world in which there's superior and inferior. And our actions are going to be coming from that. They're conditioned by our preference for this one person. And then this one person isn't going to be lovely and delightful forever after. They also have moods, and sometimes they have a good day and they say all the right things, and other days they have a bad day and blame us for everything. And all of a sudden you realize, not so nice anymore. Today I leave you, I come back tonight, you spend your time on your own. And so what happens to the romantic love? You realize it's it's an ideal, and it's conditioned experience. And there are a lot of fairy tales. I mean, Hollywood serves us these fairy tales by the dishful, but every culture has them. The idea of finding the special one that makes you feel good and worthy and appreciated, and you'll be happy forever after. And make babies, by the way. You'll see that's a bunch of fun. It's an idea. It's a beautiful idea, it's very tempting, and if it was real, it would be great, but it's not. And we change, our tastes change, other people change, and it's not happiness ever after. So you realize there's the ideal, and then there's the reality. And so we create a lot of suffering if we expect this one person to make us happy for the rest of our life. They're not going to be able to live up to that. It's actually not a very kind thing to expect of someone to be responsible to make us happy forever. It's a punishment, actually. Because happiness is then dependent on conditions that change and that are impermanent. Human bodies are sometimes beautiful when they're young, but not always, but they don't stay beautiful. And usually when human bodies get old, they become a bit of an undignified embarrassment. And so we can't count on that to be a source of happiness. So when we come back, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with getting married and sharing one's life with someone. But if one looks at love in terms of a quality in the mind that arises in the mind, and it's about accepting, about being kind to the present moment as it is, not fighting with it. So when you realize when you're with somebody who is having a bad day, just if I can help, out of compassion I'll do something, but sometimes you can't. It's beyond you. And just to allow someone to have a bad day. Like, we appreciate it if people are not always on our back, if we're not making them happy and they come and tell us, hey, you've got to change because you're not okay the way you are. I want you to be like this because that's what makes me happy. And saying, hey, yeah, get lost, will you? So, noticing, coming back to the awareness, because this is only this place where we experience life from, where we experience the world from. Coming back to here, and noticing how being around other people, how they behave, how they speak, how it affects us, and noticing that, because that's where we experience things, is the reaction, the feeling is here. And just taking responsibility for that. This is the feeling, and I'll just try and establish awareness of the feeling. This is just a feeling arising with these conditions. And then you notice that it's actually pretty easy to be around people who are in a bad mood if you don't get involved with trying to resist or change them or argue with them or anything. Like, their mood is their problem. If they're happy, that's their experience. If they're unhappy and angry, that's their experience. And whatever action and speech come from that is their karma. The results of their karma belongs to them, not to us. But we are responsible for the karma that we create. So what karma am I creating in relationship to my feelings? Am I attaching, grasping, trying to make good things last when they naturally cease, trying to make unpleasant things cease when maybe they need to go on for a bit? That's creating suffering here. That's my karma, that's what I create. And as I wish to be free from suffering, then how can I experience these pleasant and unpleasant, neutral feelings, emotions, in a way that just allows them to be what they are? They arise. A pleasant feeling is like this. It ceases. It's its nature. I can let it go. I enjoyed it while it was here. An unpleasant feeling arises. That's not nice, but this is what it feels like. It's like this right now. And just to be patient, endure it, and then that ceases. And every time you just stay with that, stay with the arising and ceasing, you realize the peace, the very fulfilling peace that nourishes the heart when we're not fighting or struggling to hold on to the things or people we like and get rid of the things and situations and people we don't like. So romantic love is really an idea that we create in the mind. We inherit from society, from Hollywood, Walt Disney, Bollywood, whatever.
If I may, I would just like to add to something that he said. He spoke of the romantic love, but isn't it also necessary for the world to go further? The process of birth. I mean, today the birth of the Buddha, or today the Buddha's son, or for the world to move on, you know. And to do that, don't you have to create the emotion and embrace the emotion of love, and not be in samta towards it. Thank you.
If you're afraid the world is going to end and that population is going to go down, then go for it. Someone asked Lumpur Cha, he said, well, what if everybody ordains? There's going to be nobody left to feed the monks. And Lumpur Cha just laughed and said, yeah, you're like the earthworm who's afraid you're going to run out of earth.
Having heard Dhamma and understanding it with the limited abilities that we do have, and establishing good faith in Dhamma, so what do you think, with what urgency we should decide to join the monastic life? Do you think ever we should wait for right conditions to arise for this decision to make? How should we make this decision?
I'm not sure how to answer that. Because it's a very personal thing. Not everybody is made or meant to ordain. A lot of people, there's a rough proportion of people who come to the monastery, say in the way, the different steps into ordaining as a monk. In Wat Pah Nanachat, you sort of come and stay for a few weeks as a layperson, wearing white shirt and pants, or for women, white shirt and black dress. I would say for the men, because in Thailand they have monastic tradition for men, and they don't have in Theravada there isn't really a tradition for women to ordain as full bhikkhunis. You stay as a few weeks as a layman, and then you ordain as an anagarika, you sort of wear a sabong in white, and then you stay as that for about 6 months, and then ordain as a novice for a year, and then ordain as a monk, and there's a 5 year of training under a teacher, and after that you're considered to, usually you've been trained and you know your rules and discipline, the Vinaya, and you know how to meditate, at least to stand on your feet. You can always go off, live in the jungle, or go and experience things on your own, and come back and refer to the teacher. But basically that's kind of the curriculum, so to say. And so generally, whether it's in Thailand or in the branch monasteries in the West, of all the people who come to the monastery, of all the people who write a letter to the monastery saying, I'd like to come and spend some time, a lot of them never show up because they change their mind, something arises, they get distracted, all of a sudden they're afraid of what's going to happen if they come and have to face themselves, obstacles come up, whatever the reasons. And then of the people who come and stay as a layperson who speak about a wish to ordain, 9 out of 10 don't, and only about 10% ordains to anagarika. And then of those who do that, only a percentage ordains as novice. And of those who ordain as novices, not all of them ordain as monks. Of those who ordain as monks, not all of them stay beyond 5 years. So it's not an easy life. Renunciation, if you're going to live monastic life as a monk or as a bhikkhuni in bhikkhuni tradition, what the Buddha gave us as a vehicle is a vehicle of renunciation. We're such sense pleasure junkies that we're not out of our own good intentions going to relinquish our attachment to sense pleasures very easily, which is why he created the Sangha and the Vinaya. So we follow these rules where we refrain we only eat once or twice a day. We don't have 3 meals a day, or in Thailand they love to have small meals, but even more than some people speak about having 7-8 meals a day, just a little bit here, a little bit there. They won't eat much, but every time they eat, they're just really enjoying food. And some very sensual people. And some of them are absolutely petrified of ordaining, even though they would like to, but the sheer idea of having only 1 meal a day and giving up the other 7, can't do it. And that's just a pretty simple seeming attachment. We're giving up sexuality completely. We're completely giving up the ability to rely on ourselves, to feed ourselves, shelter, all the 4 requisites. We don't plant anything, food or crops where we can make cotton, and we're entirely dependent on the generosity of lay people. And if lay people stop providing for us, we sort of shrivel up and die, basically. And so giving up the control on your own life to that extent is not an easy thing to do. And we don't sort of go to shows and parties and stuff like that anymore. When you ordain in a community, you're usually inspired by the teacher, by the teaching, but then you come and live there and all of a sudden you find yourself with a whole group of people who you don't know, and some of them you get along with, you can become friends. A lot of them are just there and you're not necessarily friends with them. So I remember the first couple of years sort of really kind of pining for a sense of friendship. I'm kind of naturally a pretty sociable person, and going from lay life where I was very often seeing friends, good friends, people I trusted, I felt comfortable with, I could share stuff with. All of a sudden I'm in the monastery with all these guys who are all junior monks. We were all very idealistic the first few years, and sort of, I'm not going to indulge in too much chatting around and bonding with people because I'm a serious meditator. And so all of a sudden you'll experience a lot of loneliness. So you're giving that up as well, a circle of friends and family. Being able to just go home and sort of feel the security of being with people you trust and you feel comfortable with. They love you, they'll approve you, they have your back, they'll stick by you. If you get in an argument with someone and you speak about it, they usually like you enough that they'll say you're right, even if you're not. But it feels good. And in the monastery you won't necessarily get that. And we just have one set of clothing. It's not necessarily fun, nice clothes to wear, fashionable, but it is what we have. That's what we use. And the shelter, we usually have pretty simple dwellings. Don't always have aircon or fans or heating. is not always dry. Sometimes we go and spend some time in a forest, it's very damp for the whole rainy season, and all the cloth gets moldy and stinky, but that's what you have. So in terms of finding pleasure, finding relief from suffering, the natural suffering of everyday life, finding relief from that in a little fix at the level of the senses, you don't have that much. We have one meal a day. It becomes a big thing, that one meal a day, but it's not like every time you're bored or feel unhappy you can open the fridge and have a piece of cheese, a marshmallow, cook up some steak and French fries, or have a curry or dessert, whatever. Your favorite food, your comfort foods. That's, as a Westerner in Thailand, at the beginning, there's no such thing as comfort food. Everything's spicy and tastes weird. So in turn, the whole Vinaya is designed to support renunciation. And the purpose of it is the Buddha is trying to help us break free from our attachment, our dependence on sense pleasure, so that we can fall back on something inside, initially mental pleasure, the pleasure you develop out of renunciation, the pleasure of meditation, peace of mind. Sometimes you don't even have that. You're sort of running after samadhi, running after some peace of mind, just again to find relief from the misery of daily life, and it's just not happening. And the more you need it, the less you'll get it, because you start operating from desire, and the result of following desire is suffering, not happiness. And so it can be a very challenging experience, and not everybody has the wish, or the resource, or the ability to do this. What's important really is the practice. Sort of using the Four Noble Truths to relate, to inform the wisdom of the Buddha, the wisdom of the Buddha's teaching. And the format of the Four Noble Truths is so very basic, so very simple. It helps us sift through the complexity of our experience, the complexity that arises out of thinking and emotions and creating a sense of self. It helps cut through all of that, and that is what's going to be liberating at the end. The monastic form is very helpful. It's a very helpful vehicle to support that practice, because it simplifies life. When you have only one meal a day, it's pretty obvious the attachment to food and to the pleasure that comes from food. So you can see that. And then you don't have anything until tea time in the afternoon, and the person who prepared the drinks bloody forgot to put sugar in the tea. I need my sugar, come on. It's only 1 cup or 2 cups of tea in the afternoon. But you just see the suffering that you create around having sugar in your tea or no sugar. And so the lifestyle becomes very bare and simple, and when things arise that we create suffering around, they're not arising 10 things a minute, 10 things a second. They're sort of, the whole lifestyle, we're sort of removing ourselves from the busyness of life into monasteries, sometimes in the countryside, in the forest. Everything becomes very quiet, and the picture becomes bare, and then you can see the individual things that arise more easily. It's more conducive to hear the teachings often. Usually you go and live with a teacher, and the teacher offers regular reflections. And you're with people who are like-minded, who support you, who are keeping the same level of sila, morality. And so it's very encouraging. Sometimes in society one can feel very lonely, kind of alone and far and wide between, where you can find somewhere else who also has a love for Dhamma, and you can just sit meditation with, finding a quiet place, a quiet time of the day, a quiet place where you can just sit, and you don't necessarily have the strength the mental strength at that moment to sort of sit down, sit ramrod straight and feel awake and watch the breath and establish. Sometimes you just feel so tired by the rat race. You just want to be able to sit down and breathe. That's not always available in a busy urban city life with families and jobs and stuff. So the monastic life offers very conducive conditions for that. When is the right time, or is it the right time for someone to ordain? It's really a very personal thing. But if you're wondering if for yourself or someone else, what's good is to just go and spend some time at a monastery and see how that affects you, how it affects the practice and how helpful it is. If it works, it'll kind of sometimes organically just start happening. And then if it doesn't work, then the practice is still the practice. The present moment is still here and now. Awareness is available. It's a matter of remembering it and re-establishing, using the circumstances we have for the practice. You know, you can be in a very peaceful place, in a forest, good climate, good teacher, good dwellings, good food. Everything's very nice in the monastery, but there's this one monk who's just so annoying. And it can really be the source of so much misery. And sometimes, like, we come out in the morning, we come together, sometimes for morning meeting, we have the meal, and then we go back to our individual dwellings, and we come back in the afternoon again to do some sweeping and have tea together. So there's a lot of free time during the day. And sometimes I just felt miserable from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed, just because I obsessed with one person having said or done something that I disliked, and the mind just won't stop thinking about it, and then emotions come up following the memories and the thoughts, and you shouldn't have done that, you shouldn't have said that, you feel self-righteous, and I should have answered this, and walking meditation for a whole hour, and I revisit the whole scenes in so many ways that I could have had the upper hand in the end, and creating a lot of suffering and restlessness. How I was right and he was wrong, and he shouldn't be like this, and then getting upset with myself because I'm not experiencing peace. I should be meditating, I should be able to put all of this down. And the next day I wake up and I remember, I just pick it up where I left it. That's what we do. So that you can be in the monastery and sort of create a lot of suffering as well, or you can live as a lay person and with insight, sort of live a very peaceful life as well, where you have a lot of, use the conditions for practice, whether there's time for formal meditation or whether you're using activities in daily life to establish mindfulness, to re-establish the center, reconnect with awareness, and develop that relationship of trusting the awareness as the refuge and recognizing whatever arises in experience is a sankhara, rising and ceasing. How can I relate to it from the knowing and take the knowing as the refuge?
Ajahn, there are two more questions. I think we are getting late, so we'll stop after these two questions. One is from Shweta, who was here yesterday but couldn't come today, so she's requested that we push this question to you. She says that if these worldly pleasures are also dukkha, how to detach from them or not want them so earnestly as we don't want obvious dukkha?
Sorry, can you read that again, please?
Maybe I'll paraphrase it. She says that we understand that worldly pleasures are also dukkha, but why do we want them so earnestly?
Because they're pleasurable. that's what the whole samsara, the realm of samsara, is about. It's about running after pleasure and trying to escape from suffering. So, when we haven't developed the mind, when we haven't developed this inner refuge, what do we have? All we have are the five senses, the six senses, if you consider the mind as the organ that perceives memories and thoughts and emotions. So that's all we have, and we're bound to experiencing existence through the six senses, and all we experience are impermanent phenomena, things that by nature are that arise out of conditions and cease. So when we're experiencing things from that point of view, we're always experiencing pleasure, but it's impermanent, it doesn't last, or we're experiencing suffering, and unfortunately it always lasts longer than we want it to. And the pleasure that we experience can either be directly sense pleasure, or sometimes we don't always realize it, but pleasure is also the feeling that arises when suffering ends. A very simple example is when your bladder is full to bursting and you have to hold it because we're sitting here. The moment you go to the bathroom and you let go, you go, oh, what bliss. But passing water is not bliss, it's the relief from the suffering that is bliss. And so as long as all we have are the six senses, and that's where, in a way, that's our refuge, because we haven't cultivated anything else, we keep on grasping, trying to grasp hold of pleasure when it arises. And then it ceases and we feel miserable because it's ended, and we feel sad. And so we don't have an alternative. All we have is pleasure that comes from impermanent sources. So while it's there, we enjoy it and we get infatuated with it, we get carried away with it, indulge in it, and then when it ceases, it's the end of the world every time.
The last question, Bhante, is a very difficult one. Why in every religion all gods, Buddha, Tirthankars are men? What is the reason?
I don't know. Lumpur was talking about that notion of God the other day as being Dhamma. And that's something that Lumpur Cha said. They were, I don't forget if they were in England or if they were in the United States, and they visited a community of Christian monks or priests, and they were talking about God all the time. And Lumpur Cha kind of leaned over to Ajahn Sumedho and he said, "By God, they mean Dhamma." I think this image of God being, like in monotheistic religions, God is very often an old man with a white beard and white hair sitting on a cloud up there and sitting in judgment of our actions. That's the way we present God in the West. That's the way God is presented to us when we're children. And I think as we grow up as adults, we kind of disregard that on an intellectual level because it sounds a little bit silly. But on an emotional level, we stick to that sort of paternal judging figure. So I think that's probably just what arises in societies and in human societies as an unreflective, very immature way of personalizing God.
The question also talked about the Buddhas being only men. The Buddhas being men, all the records which we mentioned about 24 Buddhas, or 28 Buddhas, they're all men. So she asks, why is it so?
I don't know. But what's interesting in terms of practice, in terms of understanding liberation from conditioned phenomena, it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman. Because this awareness is not male or female. And this is one of the things that create personality view, is I am identification with the body as a male body or as a female body. I mean, once we identify with the body for what it, instead of just, okay, this is what experiencing a male body is like. I can't speak for the female experience because that's not what's happening here and now for me. But half of you know. And so it's more a question of acknowledging this body is like this. This is what happens to it. And so we perceive it as a male-female body, and it operates in slightly different ways. But basically it's a body with these characteristics. And in terms of awareness, of developing, knowing sankharas as being of the nature to arise and cease, it doesn't matter if the body is male or female, or it's young or old, healthy or sickly. It's just a body, and the nature of the body is to be born and die. And if we can see this, the body as just being the body, it doesn't matter if it's male or female. Nor does it matter if you're young or old, or Indian or Swiss or American, or all of these are, again, they're the characteristics of experience that we tend to get drawn to and give importance to and identify with. And in learning to recognize Dhamma is learning to recognize the knowing, the awareness in which the experience of a male or a female body, young or old, arises, and to just know that it's like this and it's impermanent. This realization gives us freedom from being a male or a female and all the suffering that comes with that.
Thank you.
I wanted to suggest perhaps this evening we could just chant there's a chant of sharing merit. So we've spent the day together talking about Dhamma and meditating. It's a very wholesome thing to do. And so to share the merit of that with all beings. Where is it? Arpan, do you remember where it is? Yes, page 30 and 31. We have it in Pali and in English. So I'd like to suggest we chant the English version so that we understand what we're chanting. And then at the end of that, we'll just do the Arahang in Pali. Now let us chant the verses of sharing and aspiration. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my father and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, and through this act of sharing, may all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nibbana. In every kind of birth, may I have an upright mind, with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble Lord. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and delusion be dispelled. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivadimi. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Just bow to the teachers as well. Tomorrow at 8:15, Lumpur Sumedho will come and sit here and take questions, offer some reflections until about 9-ish, time for the meal.